Okay, so I wanted to look at uh, working with Adobe Illustrator, and there's basically two different types of image processing uh, applications. One's that use vector graphics and the other that uses raster graphics. And so far this semester we've been using raster graphics in Photoshop. And now we're going to start using, we're not going to put that away, we're going to continue to use that throughout the semester, but we're also going to be introducing vector graphics and what's the big difference. So we're going to start by just looking at some of the differences between them and then dive into a fun little project to exercise to work with stuff like that. So let's just go here and then so the big difference is with vector graphics, pardon me, with the raster graphics. Here we are in Photoshop. Here's an image of some kind of weird Russian architecture. And what we talked about, this image is made entirely of pixels filled with values of red, green, and blue that range between 0 and 255. And as we blow up this image, let me go back one here. Look at this area here. Do you see that? People call these the jaggies. And this kind of jagged aspect of these images, when you see that, you have this kind of cognitive connotation that this is a poor quality image. It's a really kind of low resolution image. And so this image is made up entirely of these pixels that are these different values that in that range. Now, that's the raster graphics. Raster just means grid in German. And so if we shift over, let's just hide that here, and if we shift over to Illustrator, Illustrator uses vector art. And so what that means is that instead of using grids of pixels, they're using mathematical equations to create the artwork. And so just as an example, you'll see something like this. This is the math that's behind it. What we're going to see as we're working with Illustrator is that there are these anchor points that are in this kind of Cartesian framework where one point is here, another point is here, and there's a line that connects these different points. And so then these become filled in with different colors. But the key idea here is that it's all done mathematically, and you can zoom in on this and you don't get the jaggies. And that's the kind of big difference. And so we're going to learn for when we're working with, if you want to make a logo like this logo here, something like that. This was created in Illustrator. You can see how really clean and beautiful those lines are that don't get jagged as it's going forward, or something like this, where you can make these really beautiful patterns with Adobe Illustrator, and as before, you can really zoom in and it doesn't start to get with those jagged patterns. So I wanted to kind of just explain that key difference, and I'll show you as we go in. So here's the Adobe Illustrator interface, and we'll point out the similarities and differences, and don't worry, this, just like Photoshop, is a totally vast program that we're just going to focus in to begin with just on some narrow things and introduce some of the key ideas, and you can get really lost really quick if you stray too far. So for right now, just try to build your confidence a little bit with what we're going to be doing, and know that there's tons of fun to be had as you go along. So new document, very similar. You don't have to really put the name in here. Let's just call it exercise 1. Just like in Photoshop, you have some typical elements that you would be doing. A lot of times you might be doing stuff for print or web here, or mobile devices, video, film, etc. And these are just going to give you standard sizes. It doesn't really matter so much for what we're going to do. 1024 by 768 is pretty good for what we're going to be doing. Oh, shucks. Let me just do one more of these. I wanted to show you one other thing that's a key difference, and that's this number of artboards. So for you, you don't have to drive this up to 4. You could just have 1 as you're working on this exercise, but I wanted to just show you what that is. So in art, one of the key differences between Illustrator and Photoshop is that you can have these artboards. And what that means is, so you have these 4 different work areas. A lot of times people will use this to, let's say you're working on a website, and a website might have 12 different pages. And so you could lay out all 12 different pages on these artboards and see them all at once. Or another example of when you would use an artboard would be if you were making, let's say you have your new documentary film and you have 4 different poster designs that you came up with, and you could see and go between them easily with this artboard framework. We're not going to get into that super deep for this first exercise, but I just wanted you to see that, you know, when you hear this term artboards, that's what it's really talking about. Just like in Photoshop, you hit the Command plus, you can to make that image get bigger. I've gone too big now. Command minus to make it smaller. That little trick that I was doing here, once again, I'm holding down the space bar and mousing, and that's a great handy trick. That's also between both of these will do that. So today what we're going to do is really look at using the rectangle, the shape tool, and some of these shapes you'll see that they should be familiar. Let's just select the ellipse tool, and then we're going to click on our friend here, the foreground color, and just draw a quick ellipse. And if you hold down the shift key, it's going to make it a perfect circle like that. And so it fills that circle with this foreground color, just as you'd expect. Now, one thing that's different in Illustrator is that I'm going up here into the options panel for the shape tool, and you can increase and decrease the stroke here. You can also get rid of that fill or stroke. So now you're going to see it just as the fill, and then here you can get rid of the stroke entirely. So that's how this is operating. Now, as we're looking here, what we're going to see is these are those points I was just telling you about. Remember, we were looking at the mathematical representations here? And so when I go up to there, do you see how you have to probably look at this very detailed. It's using the word anchor here. So when I'm on the path, it's going to say path, and then when I get to that blue spot, it changes, the word says anchor. And we're going to, when I click on it, wow, we don't want to go here. Command Option A to deselect something. You can also click into the any of the white area to kind of deselect something. Command Option A is the shortcut. So anyhow, so that's where the anchor is here. Once again, we're just going to select that, and then we see the anchor. Okay, what I want to do is zoom in on this. So if we were doing this in Photoshop, you'd see the jaggies start happening, but now I'm really zooming in, no jagged edges. Okay, so no pixelization because we're not using pixels, we're using mathematical representation. So this is what a vector art program will do for us. Okay, so let's get rid of this, and let's try. And this time I want to use black for the stroke. We'll have like a 2-point stroke here, and then for the foreground we'll have that be empty. And so if we want a perfect square, hold down the shift key, and now you can see that. And what I want to show you is if you hold down, so now here's one of the key differences in Illustrator. You have the selection tool, which kind of works just like the selection tool, very similar to the selection tool in Photoshop. But one of the things that's different is it's almost like having the transform option on, that Command T in Photoshop, where you can kind of scale this at any time automatically without hitting that Command T button. So that's part of the selection tool. Okay, and you can see how just like in with the transform tool in Photoshop, it is allowing me to rotate that image as well. So it's this version in Illustrator. It's kind of like having the selection plus transform built right in, and so I'm going to click off, and we can see that there. Now, if we go here into the direct selection tool, I'm going to go over this anchor, and I want to just show you that now if I start to tug on that here with the direct selection tool, it's going to let me change that shape. And this is really all I want us to kind of play with for this very first exercise. So that's kind of a nice, it has like a 3D looking effect. What I want us to do here is create a animation starting in Illustrator, then moving into taking these layers that we're going to create and moving them into Photoshop and making a animated GIF out of what we're going to do. So the key thing that I want you to just get a feel of is transforming these shapes in Illustrator, making new shapes based on these existing shapes here. Another kind of, so let's get started with that. One other kind of element that I want to introduce is also that we can combine shapes as well, just like we were able to do in Photoshop, but this time we're going to be doing it in a little bit different way. We want to use this Pathfinder window if you don't see that. And if you look here, these shape modes in Pathfinder, these it allows you, by clicking these, it allows you to have your shapes intersect in particular ways. Okay, so you can kind of play around with this. So you can see I have some overlapping shapes here. If I click on that, whoops, they weren't both selected. Let me switch back here. So now that they're both selected and I select this, that will make that shape happen here. So let's drag that down. Now we can resize that so you can see how powerful this is as a tool. You can change the direction on that, and now you can start to play once again with transforming that a little bit. So let's say we want to start with this. I'm going to just move it to the center. Let me show you actually one more thing. So that's combining it using this Pathfinder window, combining shapes, and you could go with the intersection of the shapes and what's left between them. And there's all sorts of powerful things that you can do with that. One other quick shape that I wanted to tell you about is so we have a star here, and as you're drawing out that shape, as you move your mouse, you can kind of get it to the shape that you want. I'm holding down the Shift key, and then it'll be just in these kind of very specific, constrained proportions. Here's the thing: if you also, if you increase the, if you hit the up and down arrow, you can increase and decrease the amount of points on this star. So if you wanted to make a triangle, you just do it like that. Okay, so let's start playing with this, and this is what I want us to do. Very low stakes. I want you to kind of start to change. Whoops, you got to make sure if you want to go toggle between the direct selection and the selection tool, it's A is the direct select, and you just kind of navigate there, and we'll get used to this more. We're just going to create a shape that you think is kind of cool. What we're going to do is make that shape grow and change over time and turn this into some kind of just fun little low stakes animated GIF. Now, if you want to add an additional anchor point, you just click on this pen tool and then click on these paths here, and you can add some additional anchor points. You don't want to maybe go crazy, but that'll give us more stuff that we can tweak and play around with as we go along. So let me put one more in here. You can get really, the pen tool drives a lot of, oh, there we go. That's just what I was going to say. It can drive you totally insane too. So be careful as you're using this, because oh, fudge. It can drive, it's a little bit more advanced for what we want to do right now. I'll forget about that. I can kind of do what I want. with the direct select here like that. Turn this into a point like that. Okay, so let's say, oh, this is kind of cool. I like this, and of course you can fill yours at any time if you want. What the method that we're going to do here is now duplicate this. You're gonna, when you're working on your little exercise, get something that you like to start with at this point, at this first layer. Let's say this is the thing that you like. You could do this totally without any color in here as well. The color is not necessary. It might be easier as you're learning not to have the color. So I'm going to duplicate that by dragging that layer down to this new layer icon. You can see here's my second layer now. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to move this with this A tool again. Just move some of these points. It doesn't really matter so much. We're just kind of learning how this program works a little bit. And we're just going to make this kind of grow and change over time. And that's all we're doing. So on this layer, we're just, let's say our idea is to make this slowly start expanding outward to some degree. And we're going to make this grow. And that's going to be our GIF is going to make this kind of grow and increase in its size and decrease in its size back and forth. Now, you're seeing both layers right here with that eye on. Now you can just see the second layer. And I would recommend as you're drawing just to kind of mute that, take the eye off of this so you don't have all of these layers on top of each other. Now, so I made a few changes. I'm going to duplicate that third one and make the second one into the third one. And now that I've, just like in Photoshop, I have that layer selected here. Now I'm going to tweak on this layer. Let's make that keep growing out there. Let's maybe make this get thinner here, and maybe this goes in more that way. And now I could take off that, I'm seeing the second layer below here. And if that's driving me crazy, I can just kind of pause. You can see what I just did there. That was when I missed the anchor, Command Z that. If you miss the anchor point and you select from the path, you're going to shift the whole thing up, and we don't really want to do that, but I wanted to point that out to you, and I'm happy that was like a fortuitous mistake. So I'm going to turn that eye icon off so we can kind of see things a little bit easier. I'm going to make this grow a little bit, maybe make this get thinner. We're just kind of having fun and playing around. Now that I'm going to do that, we're going to do 5 layers, and I'm just going to duplicate this once more. I'm acting upon the fourth layer now. I'm going to delete the eye on that so we're not distracted, and I'm just going to keep going. I know I'm in the direct selection tool because I'm seeing that this is a white, the white kind of head of the selection tool, not the black one. Okay, and we're just playing, turning this into something to animate. You could change the colors on yours if you wanted to. And the thing that I wanted to say here is that now I'm going to make the 5th layer and drop that down into the new layer. Is, you know, so often our lives are crazy and filled with doing too much work. And use these kind of moments to really log off. There's almost like a zen in doing this kind of thing. Where you can just forget about all the other crap in the day and just kind of just get into doing these tiny strokes here. And so I would recommend just kind of really using your time with Illustrator as a meditation almost in a way. So here we have 5 layers. I'm going to turn all of them back on right now, and this is really important. I'm also going to select all of these. I'm holding down the Shift key. When you hold down the Shift key and make a selection from the top to the bottom of something, that's going to select everything in between. Now here's a funny thing that we haven't had a chance to talk about somehow. If I hold down the Command key, if you ever need to do this but you're not going to want to do this now, you can skip over things. So when you command click, it allows you to like skip that one if you wanted, but we want everything selected. And so now that everything's selected, we're going to go over to the File menu. We're going to export this out to Photoshop. So we're going to say Export, and we're going to talk about where we want this to go. We don't want it as a PNG file. Portable network graphics are super awesome, but that's not what we're looking for here. We want this to be a Photoshop file. So we're going to bring this right into Photoshop. We don't need the artboards. And let's just call it something like exercise 1 animation. And I know where that is, and I'm just going to say export. Here's an important screen. So color mode is RGB. Once again, CMYK is when you're going to print, which is often the case maybe for Illustrator, but we're always going to be going mostly RGB for our work. If you're working on something that's going to be printed in a magazine or newspaper, you want to always be at 300 dpi. If it's going to be staying on screen, choose 72. And this is important right here. You want to say right layers. Okay. And there we go. Now let's shift over to, so that's our fun little introduction to Illustrator. Let's shift over to Photoshop. We don't want to forget about that. And what we're going to do is open. We're going to search for that file we just exported, and here it is right here. And we're going to open this. The image sequence is not necessary to open. So what you're going to do is you see all of our layers are going to come right into Photoshop. And what we're going to do is we're going to say we're going to create an animation. And if you don't have it just yet, choose the timeline through the window and then bring that timeline window up. There's one quick thing I want to tell you about as we're working on animations, and it's a particular kind of loop. It's called a palindrome loop. And so what that enables you to do is to make something grow, and I'm going to just deselect these. So what's going to happen is this is going to grow, and it's going to change to this guy from that one, and then that one from that one, and it's going to make a change as it goes up through these. Now what's going to happen is if we just use what we have here, which we totally could do, it's going to be a jarring start when it goes back to that first one. Okay? So one theory what we could do is make our beginning, we could kind of do this in reverse again. So think of it like this. A palindrome loop goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 4, 3, 2, back to 1, and then back and forth like that. Okay, so let's do that because it's fun and cool. And to do that, what we got to do is just think through this in reverse. And we're going to say, okay, I want to make a duplicate of my 4th layer. So I'm holding down my Option key and dragging that. I'm going to make, and let's just do this right now. So we have 2, 3, to make it, you can go slightly mental if you're not careful. Okay, 5. Now this one is now layer 6, and it's based on the duplicate of 4. So we're going to take 3, and I'm holding down the Option key and going to drag that up here, and this is going to be 7, and then 2, Option key, and going to drag that up, and now we can make that 8. Okay, just FYI, I'm going to go Command delete twice there, Command Option Z. On the second one, I just wanted to show you that I can also duplicate it this way, just like we were doing in Illustrator. You take any layer and drag it into the new layer, it'll make a copy of it. And then we can just drag it up to where we want it to go. Hopefully, just make sure that goes to the very top. Okay, so what's going to happen here, you may be asking yourself, why didn't I do the first layer and the last layer? Because if we went to the first, if we duplicated the first layer and put it there, what's going to happen is it's going to do that layer twice. So doing just the interior 2, 3, and 4, it's going to make every layer play just once. Okay, I think you'll think about that, and that'll work for you. Create frame animation. Okay, and if you're seeing something that says video there, choose the one that says there's two choices, video or frame animation. This is like when you're working within the timeline, this upper drop-down menu in the upper right-hand corner is really important. And you say make frames from layers. So there we go. All 8 of our layers now are in the timeline. And what we can do here is we can play this once. If we click here, we can play it forever, forever, ever. And that's what we want. And this is going to play really fast because there's no time in between here. I'm going to hold that shift key down to select everything, just that same trick in a different horizontal now. Let's change it to 0.1 seconds here. And now let's hit the play bar. So there's our animation that we just created. Super fun for the whole family. And it's doing the palindrome loop, going back to the first one. It's not as important right now when we're doing, like if this was something where it was like a ball going back and forth across the screen, it would be more important to have the palindrome loop. But I just wanted to introduce the concept to you. Okay, that's looking great. You can try with 2 seconds or no seconds and play with that and see what feels good. You can also just do these individually. You can have it pause longer on that first one for some reason, and you can do the same thing. And we'll talk about some animation tricks, some principles of animation when we get together in the next class. So, but for right now, let's make this an animated GIF. So if you want to, this used to be super easy to do in the just slightly older version of Photoshop, and if you want to see some great like people hating on Adobe, go look up why they chose to make Save for Web this legacy thing, but they haven't supplied an easy version of how to do it in their new world order. But for right now, choose File, Save for Web under Export. Okay, so here we're going to have, we want to always choose a GIF option when you want to make an animated GIF. You can see what's cool about this, the GIFs and the PNGs, the PNGs, your transparency will show through here. So it's really nice to have something that's not blocky. It'll be this nice natural shape that we've created. We want a GIF. So let's choose in between. The more numbers here, let's just try 128, no dither. You can see here, basically, the more, this is a really important screen that we're looking at. This is the Save for Web screen. The more colors, the bigger the size. The less colors, that's these colors here. You can see there's a kind of shrinking in the size of that depending on the less colors that we use. Let's go right in between. And the other thing you might be asking yourself is what the F is dither, and that's a really good question. Let me hit cancel. I'm going to just hide this for 2 seconds and just show you quickly what dither is. Okay, so this is no dithering here. You can see this kind of smooth, gradual change between one color and another. And here's some examples of different types of dithering. And you can see it's that kind of speckling there, this kind of noise, it looks like, kind of visual noise. What it does, and this is so much of digital media production, is this balance between image size. You can see to do it, to print it out here as without the dithering is going to make something bigger. With the dithering makes it smaller. So it's a way to give you options to compress your image even more because you're always, when you bring something online to the web, we all hate when a page takes a long time to load up, and that's adding the dithering here is a way to, if your file is too big, you can try to find a compromise between image quality and size. Okay, and so we're going to say no dither because I want it to look as good as it can, and we'll go with the halfway point here, and it's 67 kilobytes. We'll say save to that. We'll just throw it to the desktop and save it out. Okay, and now if we hide this, and here's our GIF, we could bring it right into a browser, And there it is. This is our animation we just created, and you can put that online. Very nice. So that's the end of the lesson for today. So create something in your, by the way, this background was made in Illustrator. It just has a fun little, yeah, we'll talk about making patterns shortly. So for next week, try just doing this once. Play with that and experiment with choosing those anchor points and combining those different shapes and transforming the shapes. I'll see you Thursday.